Can you keep a secret? Well, the state of Arkansas can and has for nearly 50 years kept a secret of the Holocaustic death of 21 African American boys ages 13 through 17 years old. We're all familiar with Jim Crow laws rooted in the Deep South, which made life almost unbearable for many of our fellow human beings, nearly all of the 20th century. Why, you may ask? Well, it's simple. It was all because of the color of their skin. Legal segregation was common law back then, and civil rights for African Americans was almost non-existent. Lynchings, bombings, and outright disrespect set the stage for some of the most worst times in American history. And Arkansas was surely not immune to these problems. Most Americans became quite familiar with the small southern state of Arkansas, mainly due to the Central High crisis. The defiance by then-Governor Orville Faubus and his blatant public refusal to obey the Brown v. Board of Education desegregation laws passed in 1954. This law ruled segregated schools to be unconstitutional. Faubus also gained notoriety for his use of the Arkansas National Guard to prohibit the entrance of African American students at Little Rock Central High School in 1957. His actions not only made national headlines, but international headlines as well. From then on, these students became known as the Little Rock Nine. To date, these events still remain some of the most dire times in Arkansas history. But it didn't end there. The Little Rock Nine and the Central High desegregation crisis would only be the catalyst that set the stage for even more unimaginable and inhumane events etched in Arkansas's past. Events such as the 58-59 law school year, in which Faubus closed all Little Rock schools, followed the Little Rock Central High School crisis, which was merely a continuation of Faubus's defiance to desegregate Little Rock public schools. If Faubus couldn't keep blacks out of schools, then there would be no school. Faubus and his people then attempted to lease all of the public school buildings and open them as private entities, which only allowed whites to attend, but still be financed by public school funds. President Eisenhower ruled this to be unconstitutional, that a private entity be financed by public school funds, and the Little Rock School District lawyers would block the leasing of the public schools for private use. So this left a void for the students, and this angered many of the white citizens because this action also left their children with no place to attend school. To solve the problem, Dr. T.J. Rainey, personal physician to Governor Faubus, organized the Private School Corporation. The Private School Corporation opened T.J. Rainey High School on 16th and Lewis Street, which was a privately funded school for white students where most of the white pupils attended to get their education for the 58-59 school year. But for many other students, their fate would not be so fortunate, because many never attended school that year at all. Some waited and finished the next school year a year behind, and some went into the workforce and never received the chance to reclaim their lost year. Although the lost year is less known to the public than the Little Rock Central High crisis, there may be an even lesser known event that also happened as a result of these two aforementioned events. A tragedy so horrid, it's almost never again been mentioned. March 2nd, 1959. The Little Rock Chamber of Commerce says the city's high schools should be reopened on a controlled plan of desegregation to satisfy the federal courts, and of course to stimulate the fledgling local economy. This action in turn sets the stage for the most unimaginable and inhumane tragedy ever recorded in Arkansas history: the Holocaustic massacre of 21 young African American children, which we have referred to and named the Wrightsville 21.
March 5th, 1959, a fire breaks out at the Arkansas Negro Boys Industrial School, but the only doors are locked. 48 children escape, 21 die.
The city found bodies piled in corners or in situations where they were trying to get out.
Arkansas's secret Holocaust, Monday at 10.
Wrightsville, Arkansas, located 10 miles southeast of Little Rock, was home to the Wrightsville Negro Boys Industrial School, an institution developed to house young African American children convicted of minor offenses, since there was no juvenile justice system or orphanages for blacks in 1959. The previous alternative was sending these children to Cummins Prison. The school was originally designed as an educational institution, which quickly grew criticism from whites. The original black superintendent, Dr. Tandy Coggs, was replaced by then Governor Carl Bailey, who opposed African Americans in his administration. A white superintendent was appointed, and the emphasis shifted from an educational to a more punitive institution. L.R. Gaines was then appointed as superintendent. As research indicated, African American youth responded better under African American leadership. Some were there for committing minor offenses such as stealing money out of the March of Dimes or soaking windows. Many of the boys were housed there because they had no place to go. Some were from broken homes, others were sent there for just being truant from school. The truant officers pursued the young black boys with a predatory zeal. Listen to this testimony as to how the boys were singled out and sent away to the Wrightsville Negro Boys Industrial School.
Dean Green was the truant officer, and that he went around all in the black neighborhood, and if kids were playing hooky from school or wasn't at school that day or anything that they were accused of, he was the one that would pick them up.
There was a guy named Dean Green, and they had several other guys who dealt with truancy. That's kind of what landed me there, basically not going to school and leaving home. They took me to the juvenile hall, and the juvenile court sent you to the boys' school.
Well, no jury trial in there.
There was no jury trial.
That's J.P. Hearn.
What is that?
That's where you'll go to their police and go to chief police, and they sit down and they have a hearing on you.
I don't remember a trial. I remember them sentencing me telling me I had to go to the boys' school. First time you go to the boys' school, they send you for 5 months.
You can imagine what it was like. That basically, in making a determination, they probably just brought a child into their office. I mean, there was no counsel. It was just a total arbitrary decision that was in that whole era of Jim Crow, that you just did that over and over again, and nobody even thought about it.
They could be picked up off the street, and they would just take them, and then the parents were notified later, after they were at the Boys Industrial School.
When did your family first find out that Amos was being taken to the Boys Industrial School?
Second day after he was arrested.
When was the first time that you had contact with your mother?
Probably, within the first month. My mother came to visit me, so she'd come to see about me. But, about close to maybe a month or so into after being there.
Parents didn't have very much recourse then after their child was picked up. They just had to kind of go along with the program. Sometimes parents were able to bring their kids back home, and sometimes they weren't.
In 1959, you had kids who were just simply didn't have a place to go. They hadn't done anything wrong. They hadn't violated any laws. They were a lot of them were just dependent, neglected kids that the state of Arkansas wasn't doing anything about.
It all depended on what Mr. Green said, or what he thought about that child, or the family of that child. And kids, and especially boys, feared him.
It was a totally just willy-nilly process of making decisions about very important questions of law.
I remember them referring to them as bad boys. They weren't that mean, the ones that I came in contact with, they were just ordinary kids.
And once the boys were sent to the Wrightsville Negro Boys Industrial School, they were forced to live in dilapidated buildings. They had very little supervision, no indoor plumbing, and were forced to drink contaminated groundwater. The quarters were unfit for human habitation, and 69 boys were forced to live literally 3 feet apart from each other in a space of 1,500 square feet.
Let's talk about the school. What kind of building was it?
They had some wooden buildings. They had all wooden buildings. There were three. It looked like it was, well, at that time, looked like what had been an army camp or army barracks. There were wooden buildings there. And yeah, it was like a U-shaped building. The front part of the building was where the U came out at, and that was like the recreation or the common hall or the common area. And the other wing was a dormitory, and another wing was classroom, the one classroom they had.
The building was constructed in the early 20s. In your perception, was the condition of the building sufficient enough to house some 69 boys? We're talking about the small boys' dorm that ultimately was destroyed by fire.
I would think it was not, because by that time I had passed through the military service, had lived in a barracks, and had some idea of how many guys would live in a barracks and how it was laid out and all that. I didn't think that the boys' barracks had any of those qualities.
It wasn't fit for human beings and for kids to be. Where did they sleep, that many kids in such a small area?
Did you have any concern regarding safety, such as fire protection?
Yes, I did. I knew that the building was not structurally sound. And as I recall, there were no fire stations in that area. So if a fire broke out, you would have to drive the fire trucks all the way practically from Little Rock there. So that was a concern, and all you could do is hope that nothing happened, because you didn't have that many opportunities to correct the situation.
The thing that stood out about the whole situation was that they would lock you in this dormitory and wouldn't be any staff there, because the superintendent would go home, come back to Little Rock every evening about 5 or 6 o'clock, when they closed their offices. They would put another little guy in there, and he would, supposedly call him night sergeant. He was supposed to monitor what went on at night. And then he would just report what happened the next day. If something happened, could nobody get out?
I was kind of concerned about the door in like the center of the barracks, because I've been familiar with the barracks having 2 exits, and if you barred one, you could get out the other one. And so to have a barracks, a sleeping facility that had 1 exit, to me at that time it looked like it was just different from a military barracks.
Where would y'all eat? Did y'all have a dining hall?
Yeah, they had a dining hall. It was a separate building, and in the end, they had the dining room, and it was supposed to be a chapel, and they turned it into a music room, a band room, or something like that.
The eating place was like the dormitory. It was a wooden building without all that many amenities or facilities.
It's mentioned in your work that the staff would bring in their own water because of what appeared to be either a high copper or phosphorus content. Did you have a problem with that?
Yes, I did, because number one, your people that were working there would tell you, be careful about drinking this water, or be careful about this, that, and the other, because they knew that water was contaminated.
The staff would bring water, and for the boys to get water, they have all these large jars and buckets and crocks and whatever, and each evening boys would go to the well or to a pond and get water.
They had corporal punishment. Matter of fact, they were using fan belts and all that stuff to beat the boys with and all that. Yeah. They had corporal punishment. They was sticks and everything else, you know.
Do you remember whipping night?
Yeah, they'd have whipping nights, and they'd have a night when they would had a common area. They would call everybody who they thought had an infection. If you were eating and they had metal trays, if you made noise hitting the tray with your spoon, you'd get beat for that. And they had a lot of crazy stuff going on down there. Yeah.
What would they beat them with? You said
they had. I'm telling you, they had fan belts. They had wooden paddles. They had leather. They had some. They used to call it the hide. They had a piece of leather, maybe about this long, about this wide, onto a wooden handle, and they would have you bend over, touch your toes, and they'd beat you with that. Or this other guy, he used to use a fan belt. He would just hit them anywhere. Then they had this guy. One guy used to hit him with this stick, this walking stick.
About farm labor, do you ever remember any of the big boys up there?
Yeah, they were doing farm labor down there.
My father would go to the farm headquarters, which was on the other side of the dormitories, and he had a crew of boys that worked for him, and he was doing raising produce for the boys at that time.
Rainey's on that land territory around there, and they had cotton around there. And I think that they used to use the boys from the school to pick Rainey's cotton. There was a guy named, he owned most of that property around that boys' school. His name was Rainey. He was some rich, I think he was a lawyer here in Little Rock. I forget. Dr. Yeah. That's who owned a lot of that property around there.
Did you get paid $1 a day?
They didn't pay you nothing.
This man was a very influential doctor way back then. Even a little 8-9-year-old kid knew when Mr. Rainey's Cadillac came down the road who that was. Wasn't he friends with the governor?
Well, according to the news accounts, he was the governor's personal physician.
Okay, yeah. Probably was a lot more than that, but anyway.
Was there more emphasis on you guys working in the field or being in the classroom learning the 3 R's?
There was no emphasis on the classroom, period. No emphasis on the classroom. I mostly read just out the lot. They had I guess somebody had donated a bunch of books, and I guess I just kind of developed an interest in reading, so I just read. I did a lot of reading on my own.
During the time that I was there, I do not remember having gone to one of the classrooms, see these boys sitting in a class, to see a teacher actually performing. They might have been doing that, but I don't remember seeing that.
It was just a place of containment. It wasn't really any instruction going on. It was just a way to control the group, to keep the boys structured doing something. You'd sit up in a classroom. They had the instructors there, but they weren't really engaged in it. They just practically just had a job as a teacher. I don't know if they even had qualifications as a teacher, because there was no teaching going on.
Educationally, they were not progressing. A certain amount of time should have been spent in the schools, but if they needed you to milk a cow, that takes away from your school time. And the schooling was not one of the big things that was looked after. It was kind of an afterthought. And the bigger boys might not have gotten as much schooling as the younger boys, because the younger ones may be a little bit too young to work in the fields and looking after the cows and so forth.
And that made a lot of guys not go back to school after they left, because they were behind, or way behind their classmates. They may be a year or two behind, because some of those guys stayed 15 months and 12 months, and so if they were behind, a lot of them would not go back to school. A lot of them did not.
69 boys in a 1,500 square foot dormitory is literally 3 feet apart from each other.
Very close.
Where were the sanitary facilities in proximity to the dormitory?
Out in the bushes. There may have been buckets in there, but I do not recall any kind of flush type setup that they had at the school.
In the dormitory, they bought a barrel in there they urinated in, and then some of the boys would have to take it out and dump it in the next morning. And they had a bathroom in there, but it was stopped up and nobody ever got it working. They never even tried to get it working. It was just there.
What were your bathing conditions? Did y'all have hot and running water?
No, it was no hot, but there was no hot water in there.
How about electricity, like lights where they could see at night?
They had one great big light.
They had a light in the ceiling, and it was kind of hanging down or something like that. I would say it was close to medieval.
No one except the 69 boys, ages 13 through 17, were in the building. Normally, an adult vocational teacher, P.R. Banks, sleeps in the building, in a room separated by 2 doors from the dormitory. He went to a hospital, ill, February 21st, and no adult had been staying in the building at night. Instead, 2 of the students were appointed sergeants to be in charge at night. They had no keys to the locked doors.
Mr. Banks, can you tell us a little bit about your father and what he did at the Wrightsville Negro Boys Industrial School?
Well, all I know was that he conducted that school and his part like he did at the public school of Tucker, where he was. He taught them music. He was the coach of the baseball team.
They had little baseball teams, and they'd go into Wrightsville and the little Woodsons in the communities and play the local teams. They did that, or they would come there and they would play. They did that.
I bought this truck because I don't know if it's the same year, but he brought 16 boys on a green Ford pickup truck here to sing. They sang at Caldwell Hall.
Now, these are 16 boys from the Wrightsville
Negro
Industrial School.
Yes. And they came here. He sent them downtown, and they were trustworthy. They all came back. They went over there and sang. They sang Ezekiel Saw the Wheel. And then they went back to Wrightsville. My dad was sitting in the middle of that truck.
In the middle?
Yeah, he sat in the cab. Another boy sat on the other side. Another boy named Scrap Iron drove the truck. They liked my dad very much. Like I said, my dad was running that school, his part of it, like he conducted at the regular public school.
So he stayed inside of the dormitories with the boys at night?
At night.
Now, when we say stayed inside, are we talking about inside of the dormitory behind the locked doors?
He had a room, a part there where he slept with those boys. He did not fear those boys doing anything to him.
On March 4th, 1959, between the hours of 7 and 10 p.m., the boys were locked in for the last time, and their fate was sealed. It's not known who locked the door or what happened to the 3 sets of keys. All that's known is the building mysteriously caught fire.
The morning of the fire, I remember it very, very vividly because I had a friend who was incarcerated, is what they were. And my main concern was he burned or was he alive? When I found out he was alive, it was just a big relief for me.
Another burning of the body. Of course, we had never smelled anything like that. So this was not an event that you could forget anything about.
The dog made it on a U. You had a big old big screw they made it inside and outside. You had the 16 penny nails through them. And when you come out, you had to go around from the inside. You got that through. You had to get the outside. And the door that's in the tour, it's locked. There's one door in there, it's locked from the outside. That door that had the padlock on, is that the door that Jesse came through? That's the one that was doing that. They got the burning stuff there, and all was the one that Okay. The door came over, the fire kind of lit him up and made a retreat. That's when all the fire and all the smoke picked up. So we got out the window there, and by the time we had the window, it was 8 beds up right there. We counted. But we didn't. When we counted uncounted, we had number one window. It was open. The rest of them still had them thick wires and stuff. So I was trying to holler and tell them, count up 8 beds. Everybody was screaming hard, we couldn't hear them. They were all clustered up on top of each other. When nobody trying to get out no window now, they started screaming hard and going on. And I was one of them to run back in there and save something. So that fire and that smoke got, couldn't take it no more. First one out, you understand, he had to kick him on out because he just sitting up in the window. Anything you know, you hear no more when that fire hit. You know, all out like that.
Found bodies piled in corners or in situations where they were trying to get out. Some by the door, or maybe some by windows. And they were overtaken by smoke maybe, and they just burned right where they were.
The firemen sprayed water over the hot bricks before they could make their search. As the heavy spray of the hoses tore into the debris, the skeleton of a boy was uncovered. A cry arose from a group of boys who had escaped. They had been standing, silent, watching the operations of firemen. "Look, there's one now," said one of the boys. The spray uncovered a pile of bones near a window inside the building.
One by one, they were dying on top of each other. Somehow my mother stated that she felt as if they died, each holding on to the hope for God to save them.
And they knocked on the door. Okay. My husband looked just like that. They said the building was on fire. And see, I had water in my house. Mm-hmm. And I turned the water on, they set a bucket up and they started to water the gate. And they started carrying water throwing on it.
Well, you opened your door, and the boys knocked on the door, and they said that the building or the door
they
was
wanted
on
some
fire.
water. They wanted some water because the building was on fire.
Now, you're being 50 yards away. Could you look out and see the building burning?
I saw smoke.
But not flames, or were there flames?
I don't know. I remember it's smoke, the big thing of smoke coming out.
Okay.
And then I called the fire department, Mr. James, and the necessary people. But they didn't come when I called them, because I was mad.
They were bringing bodies out. They were bringing pieces out. They were bringing stuff out of there.
And I just saw the torso. It was a torso, and that's all that was.
That must have been a pretty horrific memory for a 13-year-old girl to have to remember.
I remember it like it was yesterday.
We were running parts and stuff like this, arms was running, feet and stuff from different people. So I'm on top of each other with something body would burn all the off. That was thinking. It might have been 2 or 3 on the answer.
I remember seeing Daniels, and he had a gold belt on, and we saw the belt, and all the boys were talking among themselves about who it was.
How'd you recognize it? Was it only by the belt?
Only by the belt, but I was pretty sure of the belt. You know, it was a unique gold belt, and everybody knew who the belt belonged to.
Describe what you saw attached to the belt.
A charred, burnt body. It was burnt beyond recognition of As far as looking at the body telling who it was, the belt was the only indication of who the person was.
Okay, but there were no arms,
no arms, no legs.
So it was just attached to a torso.
Right.
Well, in the rain, we're still telling, still raining, kind of cold. It was cold. And out there, still, you're not good. It's just, the man wouldn't even sit up. Just like right now, might as well just feel pleasant day. Because all you look at, you think about your friends, your associates, you passed away, you still smelling their bodies and stuff. Ain't nothing you do about it, you do the best you could. So what else could you do?
How did you feel the night of the fire, knowing that 21 boys that you had cared for had lost their lives?
Is there a God? Is there a God? Why would God let these boys get burned up? And I know them, his one come with his little finger, he's picked it with a pen, straight pen or something. He's picked it so he can come to the nurse and I'll put some alcohol or something on him, the Band-Aid. All these little boys over there burning up. How would you feel? You don't forget that.
It was about a month to get that sin out of your system and stuff, and body cells and all this stuff. I don't care where you go or what you eat, you still, that body cell was in you. I mean, it takes time to wear out of it.
Governor Faber said he had inspected closely the school a year ago with Superintendent L.R. Gaines, and that he had given special attention to the safety features, fire extinguishers, means of ingress and egress. He said he believed the safety precautions were adequate. The morning of the fire, Superintendent L.R. Gaines told Governor Faubus and the press the doors were locked and no one had keys and there were no adults in the building. Wilson Hall gave a conflicting account. Hall indicated he was on duty inside the dormitory and told reporters that he was seated next to the large wood stove in the classroom. He said he'd been there since 10 p.m. the night before the fire. At 4 p.m. the day of the fire, Superintendent L.R. Gaines contacted the Arkansas Democrat to recant his early morning account of the fire. L.R. Gaines now stated that there were adults on the premises with keys and blames his confusion on shock due to the massive loss of life. A few days later, Gaines avoided grand jury testimony by abruptly moving to Chicago with his wife.
In the news account, it said that Gaines asked Wilson Hall to change his story.
I wouldn't doubt that. He also asked him, he told him what to say in the first story.
Okay.
So I'm not surprised to hear that he came back later in the day and told him to change it.
How do you know that this actually occurred?
We heard our mother and dad talking about it.
Right.
Contemporaneous when it was happening. And she was saying, Wilson, why are you doing that? Wilson, why are you letting him make you do that?
You remember hearing your mother asking your father, Wilson Hall, why he allowed Gaines to influence him to say that there was an adult in the building at the time of the fire with keys, specifically him.
He never had keys to the building. He had no responsibility for keys, locking and unlocking the doors. But what he was a good person, a gullible person, who when Mr. Gaines, the superintendent, came to him that morning and said, this is what I want you to say. And he was too gullible to know what he was about to do. And he went along with it. But he had no responsibility for having the keys and locking and unlocking those doors. He never did.
Any reasonable person would have known that those kids weren't supposed to be locked in by themselves with no ability to get out. And my father, I'm sure, didn't think about the negative consequences that would have ensued.
6 hours after the fire, back in his office at the Capitol, Governor Faubus charged that it was caused by negligence and that there would be an investigation to the fullest extent to place the blame. This is absolutely inexcusable, the governor said. All the boys could have escaped before the fire cut off their means of exit had there been someone in the building to unlock the doors.
The news on the television that evening, the day of the fire,
You remember the television?
Yes, I do. And Baba said, after saying whatever he said about other people, he said, and Wilson Hall should be kicked off the farm. I do remember him saying Wilson Hall should be kicked off. And as we sat there around our television and heard that was tough on all of us, knowing that he had no responsibility for those boys.
Knowing he was not on the premises.
Correct.
How did it make you feel?
It was bad. It made me feel real bad. Never forgot it. Never forgave Governor Fathers. It's pretty rough.
We were off the property. We were forced to move off the property probably within a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the pain the parents must have felt? First, having their children taken unwillingly, and then dealing with the news that their sons had been locked in and burned alive.
Share with us that Thursday morning, the day of the fire, when you found out that Willie was in it. How did you find out about the fire?
My wife, friend, they was working at the furniture factory, and she called her that morning. She said, "Polly, you heard about the boys in school and just got burned up down the rise?" She said, "No, we hadn't got up because it was around about 5:30, 6 o'clock when she called that."
The rebel penetrated came and knocked on the door. Told my mom, boys and dust schools on fire and right. Mom and dad, when the rebel penetrated.
So that time I called Mr. Folsom, that was my former electric water company, and told him what happened. He said, "Well, Emma, pick up all the time you want to see just what happened." So after that, me and my wife got into the car and we went down there.
I remember my dad, but going places and doing things, like that. But I really didn't understand. I knew where he was going at the time because he really didn't know at the time what he was doing. He was just going to find out to see what actually did happen.
I guess we got on that about what? 10 or 11 o'clock that day.
When we got down there to where you turned to go to Ford Industrial School, the sheriff department had their part of the road blocked off. Couldn't go down to the school. Couldn't get to the school.
We couldn't go down there. We stayed on the highway up there and right. And every time the state trooper would go down, he'd come back to about 5 or 6 lanes. So our boy was, he made 3 trips. And our boy was the last boy. He was the last one they come out. And my wife, she fainted.
When did you find out that Amos was one of the dead?
Found out about 1 o'clock. Found out he was one of the dead.
How did that make you feel?
Which hurt.
And your mother?
She was also hurt. God also.
I had to get my pick up and put her in the car.
Yes, sir.
Good, she fainted right there. My kid's wife went home.
That's when things got just really crazy, I think. It was just really sick. You get this sick feeling in your stomach. And then I see my mother standing at the table. Oh, God. Standing at the table, crying. My dad in the bedroom screaming. That was awful.
And I don't think I went over there to that funeral home until that next day. I went to Ducey on the TV show. And that's where I went in with the twin boy lying beside the wall. Couldn't cry nothing because I wouldn't look at this newspaper. So I went in these boys. I don't know my boy from another boy, just like one lady named Miss Black. Now she picked one boy out of that bunch and carried him to a big ball of blood. That's what she's supposed to carry. Somebody's boy.
How do you know that that was not her boy?
That's what I said. She don't know whether that is her boy or my boy.
Why is there a question in your mind that there was not proper identification of the boys or the remains, if you will?
Yeah, you didn't have nothing to go by. If it was all wrapped up, you couldn't see no bones or no nothing. It was wrapped up tight.
So, Mr. Warner, let me get this straight. When you went in to do this, you were allowed to examine body parts wrapped in newspaper?
You couldn't see nothing. Everything was wrapped up tight. You couldn't see nothing. You couldn't say, well, that's my boy there. That's so-and-so boy. I couldn't say that. Because I keep talking about that. I could have been talking about your brother. Somebody else's son. Somebody else's boy over there. It wasn't nothing there you to go by. But just what you see laying it wrapped up in that paper.
Now, the ones who could recognize their children decided not to have them buried at the Haven of Rest Cemetery with the other 14 boys that could not be identified. At that time, Governor Orville Faubus elected to pay for the burial of the 14 boys who died in the pile from his emergency fund. I don't remember how it was decided to bury all of them in one big grave. My mother just states that she felt like she was in a haze, and she didn't remember a whole lot about the circumstances. The caskets were small, like baby coffins. That was the saddest day of my mother's 81 years.
And you know, then you go to the services or whatever it was, all these caskets, these little small caskets in this row, in a line, you know, just scattered out there. I said, it was an awful sight to see, and you would think about how this happened.
During the funeral service, one of the mothers stood up and screamed, "You took my only son from me, and now you done took him and burned him up." No one I have ever met since then can ever remember such a funeral service as sad as this one was. It was cloudy and cold on the 10th of March, and my mother states she will never forget that day.
Very little was done to assist the family members after the fire. Even black attorneys working with the Little Rock Nine and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund were prohibited from assisting the black families of the survivors. This denial of assistance led to former Governor Sid McMath of the McMath Woods law firm to represent many of the family members of the dead boys.
People burn crosses in our yard. I mean, I was taunted at school. Even, when I come home, people shunned me because we were called the N-word lovers, you know what I mean? And we were against Governor Faubus, who was the great hero.
When Sid McMath came to your house after the fire, what did he tell you he was going to do?
He didn't talk to the Lord. He just got our name, and he left. I guess he's going to all the people's house, getting names of the kids that, that got burned up there.
And with that, you felt like he was going to represent you and your family in a lawsuit.
Right.
Okay.
Now, I told you I got $800.
Did you ever meet Sid McMath? His law firm supposedly represented.
No, I don't know about him.
Did you ever meet Woods? Well, there was a firm called the McMath Woods Law Firm that represented some of the families. Did you ever meet W.J. Walker, whose name is on the State Claims Commission?
No, I ain't met him.
Okay. The newspaper accounts say that you received $3,400. What did you do with the $3,400?
I didn't get but $1,000. And I went to Mr. Bob, Square Deal, and I cashed that check there. And he said, "You mean to tell me this all they give you for killing your child?" So that's all I got.
The State Claims Commission says that your family received approximately $3,500. Do you think that was enough?
To my knowledge, the way we live, we never see no $3,500.
What did you receive?
Well, I know it's nothing.
You did not receive any monies from the State Claims Commission?
To my knowledge, we didn't receive anything.
How'd you get the $1,000 check?
$1,000 check come in the mail.
But did you think it should have been more?
Yeah, I thought it. But what could I do about it? I couldn't do nothing about it.
It said several families filed claims totaling in excess of $250,000, which included you filing a claim for $25,000.
Lord, child, if I'd have got $25, in the shape I was in, I'd be praising God now. I'm still praising about it, praise Him more.
The Arkansas State Claims Commission's primary function is the hearing and adjudication of claims against the state of Arkansas, its agencies, and institutions. It also is a fact-finding body for the General Assembly. The Commission hears as well as determine claims for property damage, personal injury, and, in the case of the Wrightsville 21, the loss of life. Now, by creating the State Claims Commission, the state of Arkansas created a method which allowed injured persons to be compensated without the state of Arkansas ever being made a defendant in any of its courts. In other words, the state of Arkansas could never be sued.
That time, a fair award for the wrongful death of a child to a parent would have been $25,000 or $30,000, maybe $50,000. That would have been a fair award. So if you say $50,000, and you multiply that times 20, that's $1 million. So each of them ought to get $1 million. And when you get to talking about money like that, boy, people really shy away from it. In fact, you probably wouldn't even want to ask for $1 million. You probably want to ask maybe for 100 apiece. That sounds reasonable, okay? And then maybe they give you half that. But $100,000 doesn't sound all that unreasonable for that horror.
There were 5 fables elevated as potential causes for the fire by the Faubus administration. The first, arson, was immediately ruled out. The second, lightning. The third, faulty wiring. The fourth, a makeshift wood stove. And the fifth, spontaneous combustion.
What is your gut feeling about those scenarios, and even do you believe either of those?
Spontaneous combustion in March. I don't know what could cause that, but to me, I would think of, I don't know, like maybe something could happen maybe in the summer months with heat. If it was by a wood stove, who was there? Who was putting the wood in the stove? If there was no adults there, who had this responsibility? Who was responsible to start and make the fires?
The wood stove would have died down in flame by that time of night, because you wouldn't put enough wood in a stove to have it burn all night. An AM burning is very unlikely because there would not be anything to burn in the stove.
There could have been an electrical fire, which I really doubt an electrical fire would have blew up that big and caught everybody off guard. To get a fire to get that big and get out of hand and burn up that whole situation, I don't know. It's highly suspect.
The way the boys broke out of there, it does not look like it doesn't look like it was kind of internal. If it had been set inside, they would have used whatever blankets and pants and everything to try to whip the fire out. But that didn't happen.
There is something about this that someone or something is keeping it closed. And that's, I'm wondering why.
In the context of the desegregation crisis, this particular event happened during that lost year. Do you see if there was any kind of connection, in your opinion, as to some of the atrocities that were going on right downtown, where there were bombings and aggression and terroristic kinds of activities of the same type? Do you feel like this particular incident may be part of that struggle?
As I have come to think of it lately, and you begin to put pieces of the puzzle together, I could see that those two things were not disconnected. I think they were connected in some way. because they didn't seem to be the kinds of things that would happen independent of each other. And I have no reason to believe that fire started by itself.
Now, a fire inspector within the state police immediately came out in the aftermath while the building had collapsed, and the boys, of course, were trapped inside, and made the statement that he was certain that arson was not the cause. Of those 5 causes, is it difficult for you to speculate, in your opinion, as to what you think the cause was?
I think the cause was arson. I think it was set.
A few days after the fire, Senate Bill 433 was immediately passed. This bill declared the 2,763 acres of land to be designated as surplus. The bill would also advance the school money from an emergency fund, allowing repairs to existing illegally segregated institutions. Here's how the money was spent. $150,000 was designated to replace the burned building at the Wrightsville Negro Boys Industrial School. $15,000 was allocated for repairs at the Fargo Negro Girls Industrial School. $5,000 was designated for repairs to the Negro Blind School. $150,000 was allocated to build a children's wing at the McRae Sanitarium. $70,000 was allocated for staff at the Negro Blind and Deaf School. A few days later, Act 282 was passed, clearing the way for Dr. T.J. Rainey to buy all 2,763 acres of land owned by the Wrightsville Negro Boys Industrial School. Now, Dr. Rainey was already leasing 800 acres of land from the Wrightsville Negro Boys Industrial School for his horse racing and horse breeding operation. Dr. T.J. Rainey paid $226,000 in cash for all 2,763 acres of land. Later in the month, Dr. Rainey announced he was going to build a $1 million all-white school in the Boyle Park area of West Little Rock. Rainey was later appointed to the board of directors of the McRae Sanitarium.
Why do you think that there is still so much resistance to acknowledge the fact that these 21 young black boys had a dignity of life and a value of life, and they deserve to have the kind of memory and resolution to their death as anybody else?
Because this didn't happen now. I don't think this would have ever happened this way now. I don't think it would have been allowed to have been swept under the carpet the way it was. And I think it all goes back to the fact that they don't want to own up to the fact that there were more atrocities that went on during Faubus besides what's already known and what's already in the forefront and what everybody hears about every year, you know, and constantly about the Central Nine. You know, they don't want it brought up to them, and they don't want it brought out that, yeah, he made some more, there were more problems. He allowed other things to go along.
Thomas just got on that tiger, and he never had control of it once it started. He controlled it at first. It was a Machiavellian ploy. But once that tiger got out of the cage, boy, took him with it and everybody else. I mean, we didn't know from day to day, you know, there might be a civil war down here, you know. Gosh, I mean, there were crazies out there. People packing heat.
Why open a can of worms about something that legislature would rather keep shut up anyway, you know? So why are they wanting to open it up now? They don't want to. They don't want to accept responsibility for this. They would love to see it just never be spoken of again.
And human beings of tender years, children, confined under circumstances where the proprietors and their supervisors knew or should have known that there was an imminent hazard of death and serious injury by fire and took no action to prevent it or properly deal with it once the hazard manifested.
When my brother was killed that way, because I say that's murder to me. Because if you're not there in a school and nobody there to attend the school and you got kids locked up like that and no way of getting out, that's devastating to me. That is very, very hard to take. Very hard to take. It's what I've never had any kind of, never in my life had that kind of feeling before in my life. Never.
People obey their responsibility. If they did that in this day and time, it would be considered murder. Like these people in these nursing homes and situations like that. If something happens on their watch, on their shift, they're responsible for it. So that's what I'm saying. And I don't really know. I mean, nobody was called to task behind it. Nobody has answered. I don't know anybody who answered to that in any kind of way.
Why do you think people don't talk about those 21 boys, including Lindsay, that died in that fire?
Yes, they were scared, man. That's what it was.
With my mom, it was so horrific and she was so hurt by it all. She felt helpless to do anything she never really even talked about it.
I didn't bury him, you know. I didn't put him in a grave or anything like that. I didn't even put him as being burned up. I just put him, he got away. This is in my mind, my thoughts, you know. He got away out of this place, you know. That he went somewhere and he got amnesia and don't know his way back home. That's how I was feeling, you know. That's my thoughts and how I was feeling about that at the time.
People try to get away from pain. That's a painful thought. I pushed it in the back of my mind and just kind of got away from it, really.
Okay.
That's basically the way that went with me.
We never really talked about it. Yes, none of us. We never spoke about how each other felt about any of these. Not my father, not my mother, not my sisters or brothers. None of us. We never spoke about it. So we kind of just let that little door close, you know, and just put that in the back of your mind somewhere where you wanted to be, you know. So that's exactly what I did.
Now, the day that this happened, do you think that fear consumed you more than grief, or was it a combination of both?
It was both with me, fear and grief. My own side.
Where did the fear come from?
Fear may do me the same way.
When you talk about that fear that you felt, do you think that other black people had that fear which prevented them from taking the necessary steps to try to get further investigation done into the death?
They didn't have no help. Back out a long time ago.
When you talk about help, what kind of help? Like lawyers?
Lawyers and police either. We don't have comfort too much.
They had nowhere to go, nobody that they could talk to about any of this kind of stuff, you know. There's so much going on in the state of Arkansas at that time, you know. Central High was being integrated, and, you know, we were black people not being respected anyway, you know, so where would they go for any kind of help?
We still have that kind of mentality in Arkansas. We've still got a plantation culture that rules a lot of our society here. People are simply afraid.
Dear Mr. Fathers, how utterly shocked and horrified I was to read of the death of 21 boys in the March 5th fire that swept the dormitory of the reform school these boys were in near Little Rock. I can picture the scene. 70 boys, awakened from sleep, frantically try to kick and smash through the escape-proof windows. Only one person from the outside is there to help them, and all he can do to help is tug at the screens. He is a 16-year-old trustee. Their screams, smoke, hungry tongues of fire, the sweetish smell of burning flesh. Some boys are lucky enough to make it out of their locked cages. Others are not. Those others lie on heaps by a securely fastened window. They are burned beyond recognition. A bit of charcoal is all that remains of the boys that had their whole lives ahead of them.
The burning of 21 colored boys should make you very happy. Congratulations.
The horror in Wrightsville is a direct reflection of your indifference to the Negroes and his problems throughout Arkansas. The black faces that must today be on your conscience should not only be the faces of those dead Negro boys, but the blackened faces that you have given the South in the eyes of the country and of this country in the eyes of the world.
We hold you and the Jim Crow system of the South just as responsible for the burning of the Negro children in Little Rock as if you had struck the match. We pledge to fight until you and the subhuman racialism you represent are thrown into the garbage dump of history.
In Arkansas, I mean, that's, you know, we as part of our, I don't know, heritage or our lack of sophistication, we've always had a paternalistic kind of culture. And you know, that doesn't just stop at the sort of paternalism that was exercised in the Jim Crow era. I mean, that's kind of applied to, it's kind of a white male supremacy kind of attitude toward everything. And that's who has ruled Arkansas pretty much from the beginning to the present.
You're never going to get anything done on a local level. It's going to have to be gone at an angle of doing it on a national level. You're going to have to get somebody nationally to talk to you and let people outside of the state of Arkansas know what happened. Until you do that, it's never going to go anywhere.
State ain't gonna come up. You got to take somebody like you to push them. To come up, to give the people the fair share of what they, you know, what they lost.
You have to build a case so strong, so overwhelming, that justice will get up off the ground and cry out on her own for it. That it just, you don't need a lawyer, the facts speak for themselves. It's got to be overwhelming, and not just an accident that happened. And it would be in the same vein as Japanese-American reparations and that kind of thing, only in this case, it's actually a more egregious situation because the victims were all confined in a facility that was not really suited for that purpose, and fire safety was, probably hadn't done. It was certainly substandard.
If you had right now the authority to say something to the governor, his legislators, the county judges, the Pulaski County coroners, the medical examiners, to kind of make a blanket statement on finalizing these circumstances for these families and getting justice for these boys, what would you say if you could address them all right now and you were able to get action?
I would tell them that we need to do what is right, not as a white race, not as a black race, but as citizens of the state of Arkansas. We need to do what is right for these families, for this wrongful death of these young men, and give the families the closure that they deserve. They need to exhume these remains. They need to identify these remains if there is such a thing in the grave. They need to pay for the money or help raise the money for a monument for these young men. They need to give them the rightful place in the history of the state of Arkansas, just like the Central Nine got. You know, these young men gave their life. The Central Nine didn't give their life.
The bodies were supposedly buried at the Haven of Rest Cemetery. In order for the family members to have closure, this is what the family members of the deceased boys say they need to have.
I would just like to see justice done for this whole situation so that my family and all these other families can have some kind of closure in this situation. I'm sure we are not the only family that doesn't have closure in this situation. So I'm sure all the rest of the families that's involved in this situation would like to see this come to a closure where we can actually just find out what really happened on that night, that day.
I haven't seen a marker or anything anywhere that mentions these kids and anything about them or their life or how they died. I haven't seen anything. It's like they never existed. It feels like it just happened a few weeks ago, because it has brought up all the emotions, and it's as if those boys was just worse than animals, that they were just put in there, they died, and their bones was just thrown someplace, and it was like they never lived.
Well, I would like to see heaven give me the right part of my shelf and what to my son. He was all of it to me, you know, and we're speaking. And so I just like to see to get the best part of my share out of it that I can. That I can say, well, I got this to what Willie C got going up in that fire.
There needs to be monetary resolve. They need to be paid the way that they were supposed to have been paid at the time, instead of, okay, we'll give you a little bit of it, but this one's father's not alive anymore, so you only get half of it, or, well, mom and daddy are all gone, so you don't get any, you know, that doesn't get it. You gotta go back and give siblings and whoever a monetary amount. And I think myself that it should be in accordance with the dollar amount now compared to what they were supposed to have been given then.
It should be some type of memorial somewhere listing these 21 boys and how they died, where they died.
Do you think there should be a marker down there at Wrightsville?
Yeah, I think so. Seems like to me it should.
Why?
Let everybody know what happened and what went on. But you know it's supposed to be a marker where you die and be buried at?
Where do you think that memorial should be?
I think that it wouldn't hurt if it was there at the state capitol. I also think a memorial should be there at the Wrightsville prison, the industrial school, where these boys died. Should be a reminder there of what happened there 49 years ago.
You think there's anything in those coffins?
I don't know what it is or not. Well, if we get ours, we can open it and look in it. We can look in ours and see. I can look at it and see. I can look in it and see it.
Like they say, DNA tests are good now, right?
But you are.
Okay. So if they could take those bodies that they have there and do DNA tests on these, what's left, and find out if these kids are really there and find out who belonged to who, because the way I see and the way I feel that this thing happened, there was nothing but bones. It couldn't have been nothing but bones anyway. So you can get a DNA test from the bones and find out whose family is who. And that way you could do whatever you need to do for that. Okay, if I could do that, I could have a lot of closure with that, you know. I said, this is my brother, you know, and that would be closure.
Do you think Willie's in haven of rest?
Now, Frank, that's a hard question for me to ask. For me to answer, though. I couldn't tell you. You said 7 up there. He could be where you said some Ben Pine Bluff or somewhere else. How would you know that you go down, dig out, and we give a blood test, something like that, and then if he over there, then I said, well, that's why my son bed out there to help him rest.
What if there aren't any remains there? Will you still have some satisfaction knowing the truth?
Well, I'd have some satisfaction if they just let us have it. We have some of the ashes from out there where they said they done buried him. We can get some of the ashes and let us have it, put them over there where we got our graveyard plot.
Have you thought about it since 1959?
I'm giving. I think I think about a lot of things that I should have forgotten. You know, you can't help but think about things.
But where are the bodies? Where are the remains? Are they really interned at the Haven of Rest Cemetery? According to Horner, the morning of the fire, the body parts and human remains were not taken to the Pulaski County Coroner's Office for autopsy. They were taken to Dubison's funeral home with the body parts wrapped in newspaper. Horner went on to say he witnessed family members of the deceased boys selectively choosing the larger pieces of human remains and identifying the larger pieces as their sons, so as to not consciously consider them being a part of the 14 that died in a pile. When the 21 boys were killed, there was no autopsy, no identification, and no state or county oversight as to the disposition of their remains. As the Pulaski County Coroner states, the state of Arkansas is still responsible to identify the remains through DNA testing, but the state of Arkansas, the Pulaski County Coroner, and the prosecuting attorney have chosen to restrict any further investigation into the identification and the cause of death of the Wrightsville 21.
This is a private matter. It does not involve the county, okay? And that in order for the bodies to be disinterred, a court order would be required. They are considering this a private issue, not a public issue.
Okay, now let me ask you this, Doctor. In your opinion, how can a public issue that was handled supposedly by the public all of a sudden get flipped to a privatized issue?
I can't answer that question because I don't know.
Then what alternatives can I tell these family members that they have for getting their medical examinations done if the Pulaski County Coroner is refusing to take the responsibility?
Go to the governor's office.
What I would love for you to find, or somebody to find, or me to find, is the